Welcome to the ICRP Diplomacy and Beyond, a talk series hosted by the Institute for Cultural Relations Policy. My name is András Lőrinc. Today marks the fourth event of the new Diplomacy and Beyond series, the online and live version. The original talk series started in 2014, and 15 events have been organized in Budapest jointly with one of our partner universities. Since this July, the discussion of our new series can be accessed online through Zoom and Facebook Live, allowing us to have a broader audience also here today. This webinar is also a part of the Visegrad Academy of Cultural Diplomacy project. This project is supported by the Polish Ministry for Culture, National Heritage and Sport, co-financed from the Cultural Promotion Fund. The Visegrad Academy of Cultural Diplomacy project is coordinated by the Institute for Economic Diplomacy from Poland and partnered by the Institute for Cultural Relations Policy in Hungary, the Young Conservatives in the Czech Republic, and the Civic Democratic Youth in Slovakia. Today, the questions will be asked by Anna Sarkisian, who will take the moderator's role after the presentation of our speaker and lead us through the questions by us and the ones sent by the audience during the live session. Our guest today is member of the International Editorial Board of our Cultural Relations Quarterly Review, Igor Okunev, who is a Professorial Research Fellow at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations and director of its Center for Spatial Analysis in International Relations. He is a co-chair of the Research Committee on Geopolitics at the International Political Science Association. His work focuses on political geography, critical geopolitics, federalism, and capital cities. In 2021, he published an English textbook on political geography, and Coursera launched his online course on the same subject. He is the author of 3 monographs: Basics of Spatial Analysis, Capital Cities in a Critical Geopolitics Mirror, and Geopolitics of Microstates, all in Russian language. Let us now continue with his presentation about Europe as a civilisational mirror of Russia, as well as the historical and geographical roots of cultural clash between Europe and Russia, the waves of Europeanisation and isolationism in Russian culture and foreign policies, and their implications on current affairs in Russian-European relations from the perspective of critical geopolitics. And now I would hand over the call to Mr. Igor Okunev to head his presentation. Igor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to speak with you to discuss this topic. I'm a geographer, but at the same time, I'm working in the field of international relations. So in a big tradition of geopolitics, I'm trying to understand how geography and space determines or influence international affairs. And yes, it's great opportunity to speak after my textbook was published on political geography this year. It was published in English, and just recently, a couple of weeks ago, it was published in Polish. And I hope it will publish in some other language. And one of the ideas of this textbook that I would like to speak with you is that it is not geography, physical geography that influence, but our image of space, our perception of space. So I will just give one example. Bolivia is a country that doesn't have any access to the sea. But after the defeat in the Pacific War at the beginning of 20th century, when they lost their access to the sea, they had this dream and they had this attitude to themselves as a nation, as a sea nation. And they saved this image of Bolivia as a country that should have access to it. And finally, after the century, just recently, they got this access while they received some brand of ports from Peru. So it was their imagination that forced them to change their geography. Today we will speak a little bit about Russia, Russian geopolitics, and Russian space in a question which is probably the crucial for Russian foreign policy, Russian history. This is a question on which we always have debates, whether Russia is part of the West or Europe or not. And to answer this question, well, you don't need to watch on the world political map or world physical map, well, what scientists see behind it. This is a question about our images, about our mentality, about our identity, and not only ours, Russians, but Europeans, Westerners. Do you recognize Russia? That will be also an important. Why this question? Well, just a cultural one. Became so important last decade. Well, you could see in some of the conflicts that we see today that discourses on this issue came back from history, philosophy, cultural studies, and became part of politics. Well, for example, you could hear today in Ukraine that, for example, it is very important for nation building in this country to understand themselves as being a European nation. But here we also have that if Ukraine is a European nation, Russia is not. And we have this widely spread discourse in Ukraine. It does not work in a combination that both Russia and Ukraine are European nations. No, it works only in opposition. One is Western and another is not. We have the same type of discourse in Moldova, in Georgia. It was very interesting for Georgia because Georgia for centuries was a nation that was for which the idea of Westernization, Europeanization, was one of the milestones of their identity. And for example, in the 19th century, Russia was the path to the Europe, and that was the ground for integration. But now, for some part of elites, at least in Europe, significant, Russia is something in opposite to the West, in opposite to the Europe, and that determines new opposition that Georgia is trying to be closer to the West in opposition to Russia, which is trying to be different or proposes different way. And many, many other examples where we see this discourse. So this is just a geographical discourse, which in terms of geography doesn't have any idea behind it because Europe doesn't have any border with Asia. So we could only propose where it lies, this border with Europe and Asia. We could say that Europe is a peninsula of Asia or Asia is a peninsula of Europe. So there is no idea, geographical idea here. So let's try the understanding of this discourse in history. And I think that this discourse, and well, not only me, and that's a huge tradition of historian looking into the past of discourse. And they say that first we mention the term European to describe this unity, this group, only at the end of the Middle times, medieval ages. When, well, before this, what was the terms that describe the unity of nations of this continent? Those were some different words connected with either Christianity or some classical heritage from the Greek and Romans. And the same was for ancient Russia. It was a story that connected Russia, Christian nation, and connected with the Byzantine Empire, connected to the Europeans, what we now to that unity. So there wasn't any question how to understand those people who live in the East European Gulf. What happened at medieval ages? When you need to form an identity, any identity, personal identity, national identity, or civilizational identity, it works the way that you need to form an opposition. You need to form some others, and they will have some opposite features to yourself. And when Europeans were trying to understand who they are at the Enlightenment, the beginning of the Renaissance, let's say, and it was important for their identity, for their civilization, to understand themselves as an identity focused on individual divinity, one closer distance between power and well, and some other ideas. They produced the image of others, and in Middle Ages, those who were Saracen, or now we will say Muslim. Many literature, starting with Said's Oriental, where we have this text, this analysis, how Europeans produced the image of Orient, of the East, opposing the East to the Europe. Well, Europe, Eastern or Oriental tyranny was an image produced by Europeans. Asian, or let's say Oriental image of collectivism. Well, all this was produced in European chronicles, in European fairy tales, in European texts. And then when Europeans really met the Orient, Orient took this image. They started playing the rhetoric. And at the end of the Middle Ages, just in close years, some very important events happened. First, on the east of Europe, Constantinople fall, conquered Turks, and at the same time, Grenada, controlled by Muslims, was conquered by Spanish. And that was the first time when Europeans came into the borders of European continent. This Christian post-Roman, post-classical unity, civilization came to the borders of continent, European continent. And the problem was that now to form this new European geographical identity, you need to have eastern border. And in the east, there were Russians, and at the same time, they were under the control, they still were under the control of Tatar, Mongols and Tatars, and still were disconnected in terms of trade, in terms of dynasty marriages, so on, disconnected with Europe. Russia at this moment, and one of the Russian Tsars, Ivan III, took this discourse, Moscow as a third Rome, Moscow as a new center of Christian world, took this as an idea that could unite divided Russian kingdoms. And it worked. But to make this, to impose yourself as an alternative center of Christianity, he also played this game that was produced by European thinking on themselves. The Russians became others to Europeans, and Europeans became others to Russians. And from this time, we are playing this game of othering and looking to each other like a mirror. So to understand who we are looking on others. And the easiest way to find those others for Europeans in the Orient and in Russia, and for Russians to find those others in Europe. The situation became much more complicated in Peter the Great times, who started European reforms in Russia. And he produced this dichotomy that we in Russia, we don't know this. From one side, we are Europeans, and from another side, we are not. And what is more important, to feel ourselves Europeans, well, I don't know, or Hungarians, well, you do not need recognition from some country, from, I don't know, Germany, or France, to be Europeans. That's your own question. But for Russian, because of those dichotomy, to be fully recognized, to be fully sure that, yes, we are Europeans, we want Europe to recognize us, to feel us as being equal in this term. And we are looking for this partnership. We are looking for this mission, being together with Europeans, being part of European politics, to being recognized. Well, probably it's silly, but that's how it works. And we have in our history of our foreign relations, those waves of understanding of us. And on one wave, we remember, well, we are Europeans. That means that we need to follow European values. We need to be a leader in the Europe. We need to be partner in the Europe. We need to be leader in European affairs, and we're getting as close as we could into the European affairs, and receive misunderstanding, receive well, face some troubles with this policy. And at the highest point of this wave, we remember, some philosophers makes us remember that, well, but we are not European at the same time. We're different. We have different values, and we should be different. It's good to be different. It's good to come back to our continent, Russian, huge island, to isolate there and to develop our own identity, civilization, culture, and so on. And we start this new wave in our foreign policy in othering us to Europe, in developing some other values. It could be interesting, by the way. For example, it could take the form, for example, that well, Europe have some values, and we support some old European values of good old times. But well, that's how it works. And or some different values, some different policies. We're trying to be different to the point when we understand that we are too far from. We need to come back, and we start new wave. And if you take Russian foreign politics for 2 centuries and more than 2 centuries, those are waves of Europeanization and isolation. And I think that's a strong point in Russia. This idea that we can't find ourselves, this idea that we can't answer this question, makes us stronger, makes us at one point really separate, different, makes us available to develop some different features of the culture. And at the same time, to stay part of the Western and Christian civilization, which is also important and, of course, crucial. But at the same time, it provides, of course, trouble for Russian European affairs that happens in those periods of clashes between our two nations. And I think today we are on the highest point of misunderstanding. And that produces a lot of conflicts, a lot of misunderstanding. And for Russian internal politics, Russian identity building, and Russia is really, as all post-Soviet countries, we are in a difficult situation where we need to reproduce our identity after Soviet time, where we had this experiment of building Soviet identity. So we are now coming back to our national identities. That happens in all post-Soviet countries. It's difficult. It's difficult for Ukraine. It's difficult for Belarus. It's difficult for Russia. We need to understand who we are in new borders, in new composition, ethnic composition, in new world, new globalized world, to come back to the traditional values after the period where traditional values were shifted with some left-wing values. Now we are coming back to religion, to family. It's misunderstood many times in the West. This turn to traditional values, to family, religion. Yes, of course, because in the West, there wasn't such a huge period, 70 years, where those traditional values were prohibited. But for post-Soviet identity, that's really important, traditional identity. And in this identity building, we have this some politicians, some thinkers, they're using this opposition method. So we are posing ourselves to a produced image of West. If you turn on Russian TV, they will speak about the West. Like if there is one united West, united values and united policy. Well, it doesn't matter whether we have a united West or not, but for Russian identity building, have those united West to whom we are opposing to understand who we are. It started with the collapse of the Soviet Union after the 90s, after this period of uncertainty. But I think that recently, last 5 years, I would say, we see the increasing importance of identity rebuilding or identity rethinking in the West as well, in different European nations as well. In this globalized world, in this world with some new tendencies that we faced, I suppose that West also lost the certainty on who they are and what are those values that unite different nations. And we see new discussion on this, who we are and what are the values that unites us, national level, on continental level, on civilizational level. And in this discourse, this internal discussion, in some countries, we see that those others, which are not only Russians, which are also Oriental people, Muslim, and some different societies, start playing this old game of others to whom you need to pose, to understand who you are, to re-understand, to reshape you are. So we live, I suppose, in this world of identity rebuilding in both sides, and that produces this clash of civilization, this clash of misunderstanding. And with this, those conflicts that we have are not just conflicts, well, of oil prices or, I don't know, military base or control over the territory. They have much more deep ground. And I think our role as an experts and scholars is to understand this deep ground of this uncertainty. The good news, and with this I will finish my part of discussion with you. With the good news, I would like to be positive, because any othering wave means that next we will see new Westernization and new Europeanization of Russia. It could take different forms, and we can predict it. And for example, taking communism and making Marxist revolution was a form of Europeanization. That was taking a European identity or Russian traditional society. So it could take different forms, but Russia is doing this westernization very quickly. As we know from history, it could take just one generation to change Russia. And I hope that we could face this new, in our life, we will see this new turn of Russia. I think it will be quite rapid. I can't predict what will be the form, but I think that, well, at least the politics will be interesting. Thank you. I would focus on your questions.
Mr. Okunev, thank you very much for discussing very up-to-date issues, especially nowadays, because geopolitical issues are becoming more and more relevant every day. My first question would refer and would be more theoretical question. Do you think when we're discussing civilizational differences, international relations models, and binary geopolitical systems, more researchers use terminology that is derived from a Western approach? Is there any recent social science research in Russia that has adopted a different perspective and not using a West-centered approach?
I would say yes. And that's interesting that, well, in Western tradition of thinking about international relations, we have those schools, like realism, liberalism, idealism, constructivism, Marxism. Those are theoretical frameworks in which you could analyze international affairs. And they're quite universal. We could use them for any national school. But, for example, there was a book of Andrei Tsigankov, who lives in San Francisco. But he made a book both in Russian and in English on Russian theory of international relations. And he built this book like if we have in Russian those different theories of international relations. Europe Westerners theory of international relations, Eurasianists theory of international relations, isolationists theory of international relations. So they are produced not by those theoretical universal approaches, but they are produced by our attitudes and our identity and identity of those philosophers who are doing this. Because having different identity, you will have different system of explanation of what is happening in international relations. Well, I think that's one of the approach. Well, another approach probably will be provided by Dr. Voskresensky, who published with a colleague from, by the way, from Hungary, from National Institute for Public Administration. There was a book on transregionalism they published, and he, in this book and some other publications, he has this book of non-Western theory of international relations. He's trying to think about some ideas, some national schools of international relations, Russian, Chinese, some non-Western schools, and some grounds that gives us some floor to think about the international relations. What I would say, I would not say, well, I personally, probably Dr. Voskresensky won't agree with me, but the thing is not that we have a different theory, absolutely different explanation. But when you see on the same object from inside and from outside, you have different view of an object. And that's what happens with Western and non-Western theory, like what we have with the theory of colonialism. This idea of post-colonialism, post-colonial theory, which started in India, could be produced there, because only they could have this non-Western view on what happened with colonial heritage. Well, now they're widespread in the West, so we can't say that post-colonial theory is non-Western. Well, now it's mostly Western theory. but it was started in the literature studies in India. So I wouldn't say, I don't like this idea that we have national schools and they're absolutely different. Well, we have one science, we have one fundamental questions. We know that in social sciences, there will be different answers on the same question. This is normal. We have different theoretical frameworks, but we could have different answers, not only if we have different theoretical frameworks like realism or constructivism, but also by the scope of analysis. From which side of the international relations? From a side of metropolis or colonized nation or isolated nation, we are looking on what is happening. And that produced different, well, let's call it theories.
Well, I hope our viewers got new names, actually new for some, maybe some might be already familiar with them, where they can get a different perspective and different discourse of international relations and geopolitics. My second question would be, I would refer to Alexander Dugin, who says that Russia cannot be understood without being an empire, he says. He is a political analyst, by the way, and strategist. And according to him, Russia has no state history. Its borders are ad hoc. Its cultural index are ambiguous. Its political system is unstable. Its ethnic map is mixed. Its economic structure is fragmented and partly fell apart. Russia is just a part of a former, more global geopolitical formation and the product of the dissolution of that formation. He says that Russia cannot be imagined without being an empire. Do you think this approach can also give a frame to numerous escalations in Russia's neighborhood? What would be your opinion about this formulation?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, I will start with some clarifications. First, Alexander Dugin, he's really famous scholar, but he writes in two different roles. He is an academic person. He writes textbooks and academic papers. At the same time, well, now he's old, but for many years, he was a politician as well. He was analyst who playing as a journalist, proposing some ideological texts, and he's different in those two terms. In one term, as a scholar, he's a great scholar. He's doing analysis, but being a politician, of course, he's proposing some ideas, well, some ideology that will unite some people on one political platform. And his platform was, he was quite right nationalism, I would say. And some of the ideas, and I think this idea as well, comes from his political background. Second clarification will be that Alexander Dugin is much more popular in the West than in Russia. For example, if you see who cites and who reads Alexander Dugin in the West, well, most of what we know about Russian geopolitics will be Alexander Dugin. So probably Alexander Dugin sometimes represents some mode of thinking about Russian geopolitics that, well, which is what the Western scholars is expected Russian geopolitics is to be about. So I think that we have this phrase shows us what the West supposes stands behind Russian foreign politics. This idea that Russia could survive only in an empire form. And well, that explains what happened. I would say that I partly agree and partly disagree with Alexander Dugin. I agree in what part is that Russian nation building is not finished. Russian identity is not finished. And this is because of those problems that you see. Yes, we are in borders that we never had. we have very mixed and complex ethnic composition. While we have we have millions of Russians left in different countries, we don't know whether we are a country which is formed on ethnic group of Russians or on some political group of Russians and some political values. We need to form those values. We need to understand who we are. And well, that is really a task for a country that for centuries was first an empire and one in 20th century, I wouldn't call it an empire. It was a different country. But of course, it wasn't a nation state. So after 2 centuries of empire and then 1 century of the socialist state without an idea of nation, we're coming back to nation state, and this is really a task. I would disagree with this term empire, because, well, first, Russia was a nation state for some period of time, for Peter the Great. Second, well, I don't think that we have empires in today's world. And speaking about Russia, I would say, yes, that Russia is something bigger than a country for ethnic Russia. Yes, that's probably one of the crucial ideas in what Russia is about. Russia will be multinational. And well, probably he thought about this. And of course, Russia will have some sphere of interest because it has some sphere of, first of well, mainly of Russian language, Russian culture beyond Russian borders. And for some part of this post-Soviet space, it's still important, this Russian culture and Russian language. And this Russian language produces special Russian attitude. Yes, that will be important part. At the same time, I personally think that those escalations that we faced were in each particular case produced by some particular situations, and they're not connected in one bigger picture that Russian political elite is dreaming of a new empire, of coming back to some old Soviet Russian empire borders. I think Russian political elite is very pragmatic now, and is not thinking about any kind of that ideas that could threaten, of course, some neighboring nations.
Thank you. And my next question is exactly connected to Soviet border, Soviet heritage and influences. And here I would like to refer to concept offered by Tim Marshall, who provides an analysis of Russian political thinking as a result of living on a flat land that provides year-round access to the open ocean. For centuries, Russian leaders have sought to establish buffer zones from invasion and to follow Peter the Great's advice to approach as near as possible to Constantinople in India, so as to reach the open seas. It doesn't matter if the ideology of those in control is Tsarist, communist, or crony capitalist. Marshall writes that the ports still freeze and the North European plain is still flat. Can we say that its border connects its border context it's about the lack of the warm waters? And my next question will be about the Soviet heritage, actually. What do you think about these theories and formation?
Well, yes, Russia is a nation on a flat, not North European, but East European, mainly East European valley. absolutely agree. But the thing is that rivers on those vast valleys do not give any access to the world ocean. The rivers that we have in East European Valley, including Volga, the main river of Russia, goes to the lake, Caspian Lake. So this huge territory is on the valley, yes, but it is disconnected with world sea and world oceans. So, by the way, Russia was born, ancient Russia, which was in Kiev, Russia was born on the river trade system between Vikings and Byzantium Empire. It was built on the borders between different seas and oceans. But then it moved. The new Russia, the Russia that started in Moscow, it started its history in absolutely different geographical circumstances. So the task for Russia was not only to not to build a buffer zone. It is already disconnected. This area in the center of Eurasian continent. Well, in the north, rivers that go to the Arctic Ocean, and rivers like Lena or Yenisei, well, all the Siberian rivers, they go to the Arctic. But Arctic Ocean doesn't give any access to the world trade as well. So the whole area of Russia was disconnected from trade. So the challenge was not to build the buffer zone to be safe here. You're already safe here. Imagine you are in an isolated room and those walls of this room, they disconnect you from outside. You don't need to build another walls. Your challenge will be to find the door, to open the door, to get this access to this sea. What Russia accesses, they found access to the Baltic Sea and to the Black Sea. Those were controlled by another empires, by Ottoman Empire and by Swedish Empire. And of course, because of that, we had this competition. And of course, there's a question of access to the Black Sea, Mediterranean, and the question about Constantinople. Yes, it was a crucial question until Montreal Convention, when it was signed how we rule Bosphore Channel. I wouldn't agree about Indian Channel. That's an old English story that Russians are dreaming of getting to India. Well, there were some attempts, some small attempts in Russian history, but nothing serious. Nothing serious. There's so different territory between Russia and India that none of the serious plans were to get to the India, into the Indian Ocean. Well, just British, they're always afraid of Russians getting there. To the Pacific, yes, because there wasn't any barrier to the Pacific, so Russian expanded to the Pacific to find access to the Pacific Ocean. And finally, this search for warm sea, as you said, I absolutely agree. We need this warm sea. Finished when Russia find in the extreme north one port in Murmansk, which is in Arctic, but we never have ice there. It never freezes. That's a miracle that in the north, where people can't survive, warm water comes from Caribbean and gives one port that did not freeze, and we have now, this is the most important Navy port in Russia, a Navy base for Russia. And this port and this success mainly solved the Russian problem of the access, strategic problem of the access to the seas. So I think that now this is not that important.
Well, thank you. And coming back to the topic and overview of the geopolitics of the post-Soviet geography, Do you think that there is an existential threat to Russia, and whether being overt or covert, political or strategic, and conventional or unconventional, due to which Russia must secure its realm? May this be the reason of Russia's military adventures? And does this mean that Russia will not compromise its political geography of Soviet legacy and afford to reestablish Russian influence over the key elements of the Soviet Empire? Here, I want to also add that today we see many escalations, and those are basically on the territories of the post-Soviet.
Well, I wouldn't say that Russia is trying to rebuild some Soviet sphere of interest, but collapse of Soviet Union produces some huge problems for Russia as well and for neighboring countries. Well, first problem is the problem of Russian language and Russian minority, different neighboring states. And of course, if you're in a situation of nation building, rebuilding in Russia, your attitude to Russians, millions of Russians that left abroad, is a crucial question. Your internal political question. So if you can't support and if you can't protect the rights of Russians outside, then people won't believe that you could protect Russians inside of the country. Well, we have the same like Hungarians outside of Hungary. It was and it is a question for Hungarian internal politics. And it possesses Russia in a situation that, and Russian political elite, in a situation that, of course, they have to solve this question. Well, we have a huge migration of Russians into Russia that solves partly this system, but some of those Russians are left and they want to live outside of Russia. They suppose that the countries where they live, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, well, those are not countries of those ethnic groups. Russians always live there. And well, that's really an important issue that produces problems for Russia, for those nations, and for any international actor that wants to play its card here. Another problem is that there are some other ethnic groups that came into trouble during this dissolution process, and which see Russia and Russians as a nation that guaranteed some peace and stability for them for centuries. Like what happened with Abkhazians and Ossetians and in Georgia, for Gagauz in Moldavia, and some other ethnic groups. Well, Russians played this role for centuries for being stabilizer, and Russian language played this role as being a language of intercultural communication, cross-cultural communication. So those ethnic groups that are pretty much disconnected from modern Russia, their appeals to Russia to protect them in their internal clash with another post-Soviet country. Well, and for population in Russia, yes, it seemed as a role of Russia to protect, to continue this role, to guarantee peace and stability for those. So I wouldn't call this in an attempt to rebuild reality where we don't need this. Well, for example, we don't see any Russian influence, for example, I don't know, in Turkmenistan. There is no Russians there. Well, there is no Russian or any other influence. They're quite isolated. And this situation is quite comfortable. There is no any interest to come back to this sphere, which was part of Russian Empire and Soviet sphere of interest, or to come back to Azerbaijan. But for some other areas, because of those problems that I rose, yes, it forces Russia to come back and to act and to be active in some post-Soviet conflicts and to develop our own agenda, and it leads to some particular conflicts that we
have. Thank you. We're discussing issues that are bringing actually too many questions in my mind, but according to our format, I will go through the summary of the question that our viewers sent, and the question sounds as following. Given Russia's unique identity, history, culture, and even its flag, which has two eagles pointing both to the west and to the east, how do you see this as shaping Russia's current identity? Do you see Russia as playing a vital role in linking both Western European and Eastern Asian identity? Or do you see Russia as being misunderstood because of these multiple roles or identities Russia has had to play? And how has this shaped its current identity today? This is a question from our viewer.
Thanks. I was trying to find as much as I could nations for whom this identity has been a bridge between West and East, Europe and Asia is important. And I found dozens from Germany and Hungary to Mongolia, many nations. Suppose that they are those bridges. I wouldn't say that we have this idea in Russia that we are a bridge between something. And I wouldn't say that in our identity, we have those two equal sizes, West and East. We don't have East side. We don't have any East part of any Asian part of our identity. Our dichotomy, our choice is West or non-West, Europe or some Russian, some old Russian, some traditional Russian, not Asian, not West, not Orient. It was a choice between Western Catholic Europe and Byzantine Europe, Orthodox, which now doesn't play any role in identity building. So today, this is a choice between Europe and non-Europe, and we are bridge, or not bridge, but we are in a position of identity uncertainty between those two opposite sides. And as I told, yes, I think that's a crucial point for identity in this country, and it never will be solved. And I think this is good. And of course, it continues to shape Russian foreign policy. Just don't, once I was teaching in Texas, I asked my students this question: who are Russians, Europeans or Asians? And all of them said Asians. They asked, well, what do you think we have at our school's history of world history, school's lessons of world history? And they say, well, it should be Asian history, Ottoman Empire, I don't know, Chinese Empire. We never have this. All Russian lessons at school are about European history and Russian history as part of European history. So this is a question of European or not identity.
Thank you. We're receiving actually many questions from audience, however, focusing on similar issues. And those issues are mostly focusing on the territorial disputes. But instead, I would like to refer to your paper that was published in Russia in Global Affairs Journal. In this paper, you argued that there are enough tools to resolve almost any territorial dispute. Can you share with us the main bullet points of the recommendations of your paper?
In any territorial conflict, we have today we have this this overview that it could be solved only in a way that, well, we understand that sovereignty on the territory could be only of one side sovereignty. Should be, so this territory could belong only to X nation or to Y nation, X or Y nation. That's it. And we have this very strong judicial attitude to sovereignty. In my paper, I just analyzed history, nothing else, and found, and in my textbook, I found even more examples. I found dozens, many examples in history where there was some territorial regime that united sovereignties of different states. For example, there were territories controlled by 2, 3, 4 nations at the same time. There were territories that, for example, for half of a year belonged to X nation, half of a year belonged to Y nation. There were rented territories. There were free territories. There are many examples. There were associated nations, and associated states, we still have them on world political map. Well, I think that one of the problems we have in expertise is that we propose politicians too few examples and too few tools to solve a territorial issue. Of course, for solving a problem, first you need to have political will, no doubt of this. There should be a situation in which both sides have this political will and politicians are ready to discuss a compromise. Without this, there is no question they wouldn't just read any expertise. But when they come to the expertise and then ask, well, tell us, propose us some variants, we don't see many variants on the table. In expertise, in world expertise, we just don't learn the historical lessons. Today we have we have some, I know, we have some cases like non-recognized states that like if in today's world there's only two options: either to be recognized sovereign absolute state and UN member, like if any other state, or to be region of another country. So that's only choice of your self-determination, full independence, or being part of being region of another state. Well, there are many examples, and that's my textbook is about. I collect all the examples from history, from modern political map. That gives you some intermediate versions, well, some mixed identity, mixed sovereignty, limited sovereignty, and so on. So I think our role as an expert just to provide many tools. And when there will be this second of a political will, probably they will find the right tool for a particular situation.
What do you think? What role or link does Russia and the community of independent states have to play in international relations and their foreign policy with the EU? Or do they have any relations at all? If they do, then how has this evolved?
Well, I think we face today really huge challenges, global community and Western community, European community. We really live in a dramatic world with dramatic challenges. One of them is this pandemic, migrations, different fundamentalism, globalization, and problems that bring to this with this globalization. like climate change, and many, many others. And I personally think that those problems that we face together are more important than, than those problems that we have and we can solve. Because I think we don't have enough dialogue. I think we speak about the same issues, but with different languages. And we can't understand this. Well, not different languages in terms of English or Russian. Different languages, I mean semiotics. We understand different things under, well, the same terms: sovereignty, right to determine, self-determination, democracy. I don't know. Well, what happened, for example, in Crimea, in Russia, for most population, is seen as an act of democracy. People did their choice, and foreign policy is for people, is for making their life better. And we just described this in absolutely different terms. In terms of geopolitical control, in terms of annexation, in terms of control over territory. We don't speak about people here. So we don't have enough dialogue. Of course, we will never be in a situation that we fully understand each other and we have the same values. No, we will be different. We will have different values, different national interests. But I think that those global challenges that we face more important, and those small problems on which I think we could find a solution. Those global challenges are so important. I think Russia needs Europe to overcome its problems, huge problems with extreme fundamentalism, nationalism, in migration, in climate. And I think for some of the problems, Europe needs Russia, and probably the same problems, needs Russia to solve those issues. So I think we have a lack of dialogue here, and not a dialogue in a form that we need to have a dialogue on shared values. What we sometimes hear, that you can't have a dialogue, you can't have a compromise if you do not share some values and some norms. Yes, we should presume that we will have different values, even different norms. But this doesn't stop us. We are obliged to speak, and we are obliged to solve the difficult situation.
My last question will be a little bit of the overview of what you said, and I think this will be very interesting to hear your opinion. During the answering of the questions and during the lecture, you mentioned that Russia is on the path of the westernization and the nation building towards the westernization. And taking into account all these recent escalations in the region, do you really think that this narrative gives others chance to understand this as a Western movement? Will this all political escalations lead the people or Kremlin to the Western values?
No, now we don't see at this moment, we don't see this Westernization. Now we are on the highest point of another tradition, of isolationism, of traditionalism, of nationalism, and that's something we need to understand now. But Russia will change. Russia, that does not mean that Russia won't support Russians outside of Russia and Russian language outside of Russia. With this, I think there won't be any legacy or any political in Russia. But I think that in some time we will see some change in the discourse in Russia, because Russia uh, Russia can't develop being fully isolated from the West. Russia sometimes wants to get back to Europe. Same time, one or 2 points to add to this. Well, first, as much as we don't have dialogue between Europe and Russia, we increase the dialogue between Russia and China. And Russia becomes dependent on China, and Russia turns to the East in its internal politics. And probably we could lose those moments where Russian-Chinese relations would be too important for Russian politics, internal and foreign politics. So we have this new force, a new actor in the East, and it will play on this instability and misunderstanding in our relations. This is number one. First, second, the thing is that, well, probably you will be surprised, but for example, Mr. Lavrov in Russian foreign affairs always was a leader of Western camp, of Westerners inside of the ministry. And Putin, he came from liberals, and he came from a group of people from St. Petersburg that also were Western. So Russia today is really ruled by Westerners, which at the beginning of their rule, they were trying to bring Russia closer to the West. There were, for example, discussions of Russia joining NATO in the beginning of Putin times. Putin proposed Bush joint action against terrorism in Afghanistan. Putin proposed Blair that Russia will guarantee energy stability for Europe, and that will be a Russian role in European development. If you take the first 3 years of Putin, you will find that there was many ideas of a Western-oriented person, but he did not get this recognition. He wasn't understood in his mood, and he did not receive this recognition as being an equal partner, and he didn't receive his recognition in Russian national problems, for example, as this Russian-speaking minority problems. There's, well, for example, in Estonia and Latvia, this is still not a question of European politics. So Russian threats, Russian problems are not recognized. And that make those Western-oriented people thinking different. And then they, in Russian identity, most of population is usually more traditional, more isolationist than the elite. So what Russian elite did is Russian elite is usually for centuries is trying to move Russia to the West, to do modernization of Russia. But when they didn't receive this recognition of Russian threats, they decided to play on the majority. Majority has this more traditional values, more isolationist values, and just to let displaying these values of the majority population to stay in power. So what I'm saying about is that if there will be some change in political elite in Russia, we could see much more non-Western oriented people than we have now. Much more traditional nationalists and isolationist movements. Well, when the Russian politics are seen in the West, we see an opposition as those labor opposition. We have it, but we have another huge opposition, which we don't see by Western media, and which is not part of public politics in Russia. And there's another opposition, much less European oriented, could play a bigger role in Russian politics. And I see here some threat. Here. While I still believe that those common problems and common cultural ties will force both Russia and Europe to get back to the dialogue. This is probably the question of survival in today's.
Well, thank you once again for discussing very important issues of nowadays. Geopolitics is becoming more and more important. And thank you for providing the key elements of your work. Last thing I would like to ask you is to share with us where our listeners and viewers can access your courses and your book, because it's also published in many different languages. So if you could give us some information about that, maybe viewers would be interested in it.
Thank you very much. Well, I have textbook. You could find it. It was published by Peter Lang. It's available in all main marketplaces and on Amazon and other marketplaces with books. Available in the biggest libraries, you could find it there. And if you're interested in this book or any information about this, please write me. You could find my email easily on my university webpage. And there is another option to get in contact. I have online courses in Russian and in English. They're absolutely free and open on Coursera. So if you just type Okunev Political Geography or Political Geography Coursera, you will find my course. There will be videos and tests and all the supplementary materials. And there also will be some discussion forums where we could meet and discuss. So you're very welcome. I will be happy to communicate with you and to see you as listeners of my courses and as readers, reviewers, and critics persons for my book.
I would also like to thank all our participants for sending the questions, and unfortunately we were not able to ask all of them. But again, thank you for your active participation, and I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Andras.
Thank you once again, Igor, for this remarkable presentation and the insights you gave us. And thank you, Anna, for the moderation for today, as well as the attention and the questions from our audience. Before closing today's session, I would like to remind those who are interested that the next event of Diplomacy and Beyond will be held on the 2nd of December, starting at 5 p.m. Central European Time with David A. Frank, Professor Emeritus at the University of Oregon, with whom we will discuss how can the international community best express its support of the Palestinian people. For those who are interested in security policy issues, we offer to join our Security and Sovereignty in the 21st Century conference that will be held online on the 18th of December and is organized in cooperation with the Kodály János University and the International Alliance for Cultural Relations. The participation for both speakers and listeners is free of charge, And more information about this conference and our other programs are available on the culturalrelations.org website. So thank you once again for joining us today, and please follow us also next time.